All right, here we go. Welcome into the Stone Shield Show here on this Thursday. Appreciate everybody hanging out with us here in the comments section. Got about 10 people in here that are locked in with us to begin today's show. Certainly appreciate that. No off the bench today, as we talked about yesterday. Off the bench will be back on Monday. The fellas are down at an important event right now, taking care of that, but still have some content for you guys coming your way on my show today. And all the real ones in the comment section right now, Michael Ackley, Reds, Red Hot Reds podcast, and others. Certainly appreciate you guys for hanging around with us here at the Stone Shield Show to begin today. Got a pretty fun show planned out, but before we get into what exactly is transpiring, I invite everybody to hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. YouTube.com/ChatterboxSports. We are well on our way to 19,000 subscribers here at the channel, and that certainly is our next goal here at Chatterbox Sports, and plenty of content coming your way, especially during football season. We'll have Off the Bench during the week, and we will have, of course, my show Monday through Friday at 11 o'clock, and that certainly is very, very exciting. Reds stuff, right? We're going to spend some time talking about the Reds today. They stayed alive last night as they win the series against San Diego, back-to-back series victories for the Cincinnati Redlegs. Pretty impressive stuff. I think a lot of us, as we kind of turn the calendar into September, we're kind of like, it was a good run. We'll see you next year type thing. But Reds still hanging around, only 2 games behind in the wild card race in the National League. So, of course, Nick Kirby, Trace Fowler, and others, plenty of Reds coverage for you off today. But get back in action tomorrow on the road against the Athletics. That certainly is very exciting, but always make sure to hit that sub button. Of course, if you haven't done so already, like the stream, right? Even if you're watching after the fact, right? Obviously, our streams are still available on YouTube. Even if you can't watch live, we'll have podcasts up as well, so make sure to subscribe to the podcast additionally, but just trying to grow what we're doing here at Off the Bench, of course, and the Stone Shield Show. Day 4 of being back is today, and then tomorrow we'll conclude week 1, which we're off, right? Lots of things to improve upon, lots of things to work on. We were able to have a new camera angle yesterday on Off the Bench. That was very exciting. Use some graphics there with Reed's power rankings. So we'll continue to develop, use more graphics, camera angles, things like that on Off the Bench, and we'll start to spice up my show a little bit in the future. As well. By the way, if you missed the show yesterday, Reed's Power Rankings, will release those on the channel later today. So if you ever miss anything on either Off the Bench or my show, lots of clips will be posted to our YouTube page as like videos on demand, right? So different segments, the Bengals segment every day, that will go up as a video, and the other segments will go up there as well. Obviously, the national stuff, as far as, the pull and the traction that's getting, not necessarily in the best spot right now, but obviously Chatterbox, usually just a Cincinnati sports coverage place, but we're looking to expand that here with my show, so we'll continue to post other NFL, college football, NBA, all kinds of sports on the channel as well. And if you don't have an opportunity to watch live, you can still have access to that stuff after the fact, and that's pretty exciting. And, of course, the podcast, as I mentioned, that will be put up less than 15 minutes after we wrap the shows each and every day. All right, so coming up on today's show, we got to talk Bengals and Jaguars, of course. Getting later in the week, it's Thursday, there's a game tonight, and time to look at some keys to victory for the Cincinnati Bengals in this football game. All the time when you're talking keys to victory in the NFL, right, it kind of feels like you could say the same things over and over each and every week, and some of those things do hold true, but specifically as it relates to the Jaguars, what they're going to do offensively, what they're going to do defensively, we're going to be talking about what Cincinnati needs to do on Sunday in order to win that football game. And as we talked yesterday and really all week, feels like a massive game despite the fact that you are 1-0, right? Obviously, in the National Football League, each and every week is going to be challenged. Each and every week you could say it's a massive game, but just because of the gauntlet of the schedule that you have coming after the Jaguar game and the fact you didn't have success at home really last year makes this a much bigger game for the Cincinnati Bengals. So keys to victory in that game. Also, Thursday night game tonight on Amazon Prime. That is going to be a tremendous game. When you take a look at the Thursday night slate this year, they've really done a tremendous job. I think years prior, a lot of times it was, they just kind of put a stinker up there and, yeah, it's NFL football. We're happy it's a game, but it really doesn't mean anything. This is a banger in the NFC between the Green Bay Packers and, of course, the Washington Commanders. We're going to be previewing that on today's show as well, and I'll be breaking down what exactly to have your eye on in that football game. Our college football conversation today is kind of in 2 parts. At first, we're going to talk about Kalen DeBoer. Alabama, of course, a perennial superpower for the past decade plus, right? As far as being at the top of that college football mountain, Nick Saban retires. Last year, you lose, 4 games, right? 3 in the regular season. You lose the bowl game as well. And then you get curb stomped in week 1 against Florida State. So we're going to be breaking down kind of the state of their program there with Kalen DeBoer and lots of people down in Tuscaloosa. Definitely getting very noisy as it relates to Kalen DeBoer, as that buyout is $70 million. And some people are already looking for Alabama to move off of him. Spoiler alert, that's not going to happen. But I'll be breaking down the state of the Crimson Tide. As we talked about, the Reds won last night. Going to be breaking down that win. I think offensively still had some of the same issues. Pivetta, of course, a great pitcher for the Padres, but Andrew Abbott was better. He gets the win, and very exciting. If we can continue to talk Reds baseball here on the program throughout the remainder of September, dare I say October as well, that certainly would be very exciting, because seemingly for several years as a Reds fan, you can kind of, the COVID year, throw that out the window, right? There was one year a couple of years ago where they were kind of in it late but stumbling. If you can talk Reds baseball while you're talking Bengals football, that's pretty exciting. Usually it's just the Reds you're just hoping they get us to football season, and then they kind of do their thing and just kind of fizzle out to end the season. But doesn't look like that's what's happening here in September as we sit here on the 11th. A 3-game series after the off day tonight against an athletics team that you are better than on paper, have the better record than, of course, as well. And you're certainly playing for a lot on the West Coast if you're the Cincinnati Reds. Going to be talking about them as well. And also, if we have time, some Big 12 conversation. UC, of course, plays in the Big 12. Do I view them as a threat to make the college football playoff? Absolutely not, but I do want to spend some time talking about that conference because, with the new format of college football playoff, there's a world where the Big 12 winner doesn't get in. I don't anticipate that happening. I think the Big 12 winner is definitely in, but we'll spend some time talking about that conference because it was an up and down weekend this past weekend for the Big 12 as it relates to college football. All right, let's talk Cincinnati Bengals football here. Let's start out with some injuries. The Bengals, for the most part, are in a good spot as it relates to injuries. Lucas Patrick, of course, officially placed on IR. Zach Taylor spoke and was basically like, he was going to be out probably 3-4 weeks anyway, so it made the most sense to put him on IR. But really, that is the only significant injury that you are dealing with. Geno Stone and Logan Wilson, 2 of your starters on defense, of course, were in and out of the game to some extent against Cleveland. Logan Wilson, he hit his head. He got checked out in the locker room and then was able to return to the game. He said it was frustrating, obviously, that he had to step out, but he does understand that, of course, the league just trying to protect him and what have you in that situation. But Logan Wilson was fantastic in the game, and I look for him to continue to be really good as the season progresses for Cincinnati under Al Golden. Head injury, said he felt a little dizzy as he got up, but didn't think it was anything significant. He said he knew it wasn't a concussion, but obviously precautionary. I thought Barrett Carter did a really nice job when he filled in for Logan Wilson, right? Barrett Carter is a guy that, he's wearing that, the communication with Al Golden when he comes in and Logan Wilson's out. He's calling, the plays on defense as a rookie. BJ Hill said he was fired up, said Barrett Carter did a tremendous job in that role. And that really shouldn't surprise a ton of people because that's what he was doing at Clemson. He was the leader of Dabo Swinney's defense for several years, wore that green dot, was that guy on the Clemson defense. And I think in large part that's why you saw Al Golden, Zach Taylor, and company select him in the NFL draft because of those leadership skills, because of that maturity that he possesses. And were they as good with Logan Wilson out of the game? No, but I thought they were more than viable as far as, a defense, even with a rookie out there calling the shots at linebacker. BJ Hill was fired up about it. I know lots of guys on the defense also were fired up about it as well. So that's certainly a good sign for Cincinnati. But Logan Wilson, he will be fine. He will play week 2. Amarius Mims, he's been limited in practice with an ankle injury, which obviously isn't ideal. He dealt with some ankle stuff last year. Injuries were a problem in college when he was at Georgia, and he was banged up last year. He missed a few games, but he also was able to play through injury. And if you remember, earlier in training camp and earlier this offseason, that kind of was a big focus for the Cincinnati Bengals as it relates to Amarius Mims, basically saying, look, Amarius, if you're out there and you're 70%, that is better than our next option. That's just something you have to do as an offensive lineman. I think that's something he'll understand as his career progresses. I'm not calling Amarius Mims soft whatsoever. I think he's a very, very great football player, and I think he's a tough dude, and I think he understands his responsibility as it relates to protecting Joe Burrow. But I think the Bengals would like to see him, more consistently be able to play through injury, and that, again, that's just something offensive linemen are going to have to deal with. It's the nature of the business. They get get paid good money to do it. And Amarius Mims has been limited in practice, but I fully expect him to be a go in this game for Cincinnati. And William Wagner, the long snapper, he popped up on the injury report with a hamstring injury. He's been practicing, though, so that shouldn't be an issue. And also Geno Stone, who, as I was watching the game live, to be honest with you, like I saw him kind of rotate out of the game. We saw Tyson Anderson get some snaps, but I didn't even realize in the moment that it was because of an issue with Geno Stone. He was kind of in and out of the medical tent, and they actually were looking at his eye. And Geno Stone talked about it, throughout the week, basically saying that his vision in one of his eyes just went blurry. He doesn't know why. He doesn't think he was poked in the eye, but that's why he was kind of in and out of the medical tent. And ultimately, he said he threw a visor on after he had been in and out of the tent a few times, and he said that had helped him. Interesting. I've got eye problems I don't see very well, but I don't know. With he threw the visor on, and then apparently that didn't affect the blurriness there. He said just whenever he got out there in the air and the wind, it just affected his vision. So maybe that's something to keep an eye on as relates to Geno Stone, but he will be out there in the football game for Cincinnati on Sunday. That's kind of the injuries, right? I think the Bengals are in a good spot, right? You have some teams, 49ers, right? They're seemingly always beat up. Even the Packers tonight, who all their stars are going to play, but a lot of them are banged up, which we'll touch on later in today's show. I think the Bengals are pretty fortunate. Yeah, you lost a starter. Again, no offense to Lucas Patrick, but if you had to pick one starter to lose, it probably would be him. And, some guys dinged up. It's the nature of the game, but no real serious injuries apart from Lucas Patrick in week one. That certainly is a good thing for Cincinnati because, we sit there and we talk, star players, X's and O's, offense, defense, all these things about trying to get better each and every week. But the reality is if the injury bug hits you the wrong way, doesn't matter. You're just not even going to have a chance as it relates to try to win a world championship at the end of the year. You have to get lucky when it comes to injury, and you can check 1 week off the box for Cincinnati because, they're all feeling pretty good. And, again, no real serious injuries for Cincinnati at this point. All right, let's talk keys to victory here on today's show. I think the first thing is simple. Stop the run. Right? Are you going to completely stop the run? No. Like they're going to, have some plays where they pick up some first downs on the ground. That's going to happen. I understand that. But that really was why you won the game last week against Cleveland, right? Dylan Sampson's a guy I have a tremendous amount of respect for, right, out of Tennessee, a rookie. He was great at Tennessee. He was banged up in that college football playoff game against Ohio State. Not to say that if he's fully healthy, that game is different because Ohio State completely dominated that game. But at the end of the day, he wasn't the guy that Cleveland envisioned would be their lead back, right? They thought it was going to be Quinshon Judkins. He was dealing with his stuff off the field, and it ends up being Sampson in week one. And they fed him a lot. They gave him the ball a lot. They threw it to him a lot. And I think he did some good things in the passing game for them. But really, as a threat on the ground, he really wasn't able to accomplish much. But you got to give credit to Cincinnati's defense in their interior for making that happen. Jacksonville, on the other hand, they can run the ball a little bit this year based on what we saw in week one. They got the 10th best PFF offensive grade in week one and the third highest PFF rushing grade in week one. So Liam Coen, of course, he comes in as the new Jaguars head coach. I get it. They were playing Carolina, who's, been a bottom feeder as it relates to the National Football League for past several years, right? But Coen, he looked comfortable. He looked comfortable calling the plays. And the fact that Jacksonville was able to do some things on the ground, I think really shows you what they could potentially do as an offense, right? They traded Tank Bigsby to Philadelphia, so now they're just kind of rolling with Travis Etienne Jr. and Basil Tootin, their rookie running back there as well. But Travis Etienne Jr. is a high draft pick, right? They brought him in, paired him with Trevor Lawrence, right? In his career, he had the big injury his rookie year, and then it just kind of hasn't really taken off, I think, in the way a lot of people thought. But he was really, really good in week one. Cincinnati's certainly going to have to slow him down in this game. Bengals didn't give up a run more than 5 yards. That is a winning recipe right there. But, if Jacksonville really wants to open up what they can do offensively, they're going to have to be able to run the ball. And if Cincinnati can kind of make them one-dimensional and force Trevor Lawrence to drop back and throw it 40-plus times, I think the Bengals are in a good spot to win this football game. Also, avoid negative plays. That's key to victory number 2 for me. You look at the dynasties, right? Let's take New England, for example, right? All those years, Brady and Belichick, what did they always stress? Staying on schedule, not getting behind the sticks, and avoiding penalties, right? If you're in a spot where you have to throw it away and just live to fight another day, you can do that. If you're in a spot where you have to just check it down and pick up a 2-yard gain just to keep things moving in the right direction, that's what you have to do. And ultimately, things will burst out, and you'll be able to pick up first downs and pick up chunk plays and score points, right? That's what you saw with New England for so many years. And the Bengals, in the past, have done a good job of that offensively, but obviously in the second half of week 1, they didn't do that with all the sacks that were given up and just the negative plays in general, getting stuff behind the line of scrimmage. Those things can't continue to happen. The Bengals have to avoid those negative plays, and if they do that in this game, they're going to win. The recipe for Jacksonville, one of the few ways that they can win, is where they really can turn it loose with their pass rushers, get to Joe Burrow. They can stop the run, force Cincinnati into third and long situations, then Jacksonville can hang around and win this football game. But if the Bengals stay on schedule, make positive plays, even if they're only picking up a couple of yards, worst case, they have to punt it a few times, win the field position battle. I don't think Jacksonville necessarily has the firepower to keep up with Cincinnati in this football game. But the Jags defense has been one of the worst in the NFL over the last few years. Certainly last season, it was one of the worst as well. But there's several players on this defense that are really, really good. Again, it's the NFL. You could say that about every football team, but Josh Hines-Allen, certainly a guy that you have to have an eye on. He had 7 pressures against Carolina in week 1, 89.6 pass rush grade. That ranked 4th out of all pass rushers in week 1. Trayvon Walker on the other side of that, right? Former number 1 overall pick for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Those are 2 pass rushers that can really get home. Are they Myles Garrett caliber? Absolutely not, but there's 2 of them, and they're both really, really good. Cincinnati's going to have a plan for them. Obviously, the Bengals already without one of their starting offensive linemen. Dalton Reisner gets brought into action. We talked about Amarius Mims. He's a little bit banged up. Talked about that at the beginning of the show. So that front for Jacksonville certainly is going to be something that they need to look out for. Also, Foyesade Oluokun, his 4th straight season opener with double-digit tackles. He also forced 2 of the 3 turnovers that Jacksonville was able to force defensively against Carolina. He had a forced fumble and an interception. He graded out at 92.5 in terms of his PFF Week 1 grade. That was 3rd among all defenders. Foyesade Oluokun is a problem there at that linebacker position. He does not miss tackles. He's really good at that second level of that Jaguars defense, and he seemingly was playing really good in week 1. Jacksonville with a new head coach, obviously, a new defensive coordinator, and that's been one of the worst defenses over the past few years. They take a step in the right direction. Again, it was Carolina. I get it, but I think they're going to present more challenges certainly this year than they did last year as it relates to who they played in the National Football League. Jordan Lewis, another guy on this defense. I think, Jordan Lewis leaving Dallas, that was such a massive mistake for the Dallas Cowboys. He leaves in free agency. I think Dallas should have done everything in their power to keep him, right? Jacksonville's not even paying him a ton of money. I don't have the contract details in front of me at this point, but Jordan Lewis is one of the best nickels in the National Football League. He, too, was creating havoc as it relates to turnovers in this game, had an interception, had a forced fumble recovery against the Carolina Panthers in week 1, and he just is everything you want out of a nickel, right? He's feisty, he's tough, he'll talk to you, right? He's physical, he's a little bit undersized, right? In a lot of ways kind of reminds you of Mike Hilton, but he plays a lot bigger than he actually is. He's going to be an issue in this football game. When Joe Burrow is throwing it over the middle, he's got to be careful because Jordan Lewis does have great ball skills as well, and he has the ability to pick off the football and certainly force fumbles, recover fumbles, all those things as well. So those are kind of 4 guys defensively that you need to keep an eye on if you're the Cincinnati Bengals. And also Travis Hunter, right? Travis Hunter only, I think, played 6 defensive snaps week 1 against Carolina. Liam Coen spoke earlier this week and said that the plan is for Hunter to get more snaps out there defensively. Joe Burrow talked at length about Travis Hunter during his press conference yesterday and said basically he just has a ton of respect for him, has great ball skills. Obviously, Burrow said he watched a lot of Colorado football last year, and Hunter, of course, won the Heisman Trophy. He was playing on both sides of the football and really doing a tremendous job for Colorado. And, Jacksonville traded up to bring him in. And, it was a gutsy move by their general manager, but a move that they pulled off. We'll see if it works. I think it's going to work. I think Travis Hunter is a, can't-miss type talent. We'll see if he can stay healthy, and we'll see what kind of snaps he can play on both sides of the ball in the National Football League. But again, Coen saying he's going to play more. The ball skills of Hunter incredible. Burrow threw out the name of Trayvon Diggs, right? Remember a couple of years ago when Diggs had all those interceptions for Dallas? I think it kind of, allowed him to get the contract in which he got because, so many people were like, oh, he's this incredible corner. But really, it was the ball skills and the interceptions that kind of made up for some of his issues in coverage. But regardless, I do think that's a great comp from Burrow. The ball skills of Hunter certainly similar to what you see from Trayvon Diggs in Dallas. And he's going to be someone that Cincinnati has to keep an eye on. And if you're targeting him, if you're Joe Burrow, you got to be careful, right? Because if you put it in a spot where it's a 50-50 situation, there's a good chance that Hunter could come up with the ball. Now, the good news for Cincinnati, obviously, you got Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. I still take those two guys every single day over Travis Hunter. But you got to be careful when you're targeting him because he certainly can make you pay. Great speed, great hands, great football player, high football IQ. He checks a lot of boxes, but got to avoid those negative plays. Those are several players on the Jacksonville defense that are going to try to, create Cincinnati in terms of making those negative plays. So that's certainly something to keep an eye on. Key to victory number 3, win the special teams battle, right? Evan McPherson last year and the year before really had a subpar season is probably the nicest way you could put it. And I think a lot of people in the city have a lot of love and a lot of respect for Evan McPherson and still believe he can be a great kicker in the NFL. He made his kick in week 1. Wasn't a long kick. It wasn't really, Evan McPherson, I wouldn't say got tested a ton. He had the 2 extra points in the kick, obviously. Now, Cleveland is a very difficult place to kick. That is true, with the wind whipping off the lake there up in northern Ohio. So that certainly is very, very difficult. But I'm looking for him to, bounce back when his number gets called upon, right? There's going to be games throughout the year where Cincinnati's moving the ball well, but maybe not scoring touchdowns, but they're getting it on the other side of the field, the plus side of the field, and they need him to go out there and knock kicks through. And we'll see if he's able to do that. Again, didn't really get tested, but Cam Little, his counterpart in this game for Jacksonville, is that kid's something else, right? He played his collegiate football at Arkansas. I remember watching him there and really being a big fan of him. He's just a little guy, but he's got all types of energy, and he's got a massive leg. The kick that he made, it was like was it a 70-yard field goal in the preseason? It was just something absurd from Cam Little. He connected, and he was a big part of their Week 1 win against Carolina as well. So the special teams battle is always going to be something that you have a close eye on. Ryan Rico, he started out that game really bad with those 2 punts that ended up in the end zone. Rico's a guy that, of course, has a massive leg, but as far as, the coffin corner stuff, downing teams inside the 20, that's something that Cincinnati's going to have to be able to do, especially if they have issues still on offense where they're not, moving the ball and they have, these issues where they're stalling out or what have you. You have to be able to flip the field. Rico's got the great leg. Can he down teams inside the 20? We'll see if he is able to do that as we go forward, and also in the return game as well. It's only a matter of time before Charlie Jones does something crazy on special teams. I love the speed that he showed in the Cleveland game. He had a couple of solid returns in that game as well. He's going to run one back this year, whether it's a punt or a kick. Feel pretty confident in saying that, and we'll see. If you do that in this game on Sunday, that's the type of play that can totally flip the outcome of a football game. So certainly are expecting a lot from Charlie Jones as it relates to returning, but got to win the special teams battle if you're the Cincinnati Bengals. Key to victory number 4, and this is just something that's kind of a pet peeve of mine, and I have written down conserve second half timeouts. If you got to burn them early in the first half, as Joe Burrow did, right, that's fine. First half's fine. You can take them whenever you want to. If you had to take them immediately, your first play of the game, not ideal, but if you got to do it, you got to do it. In the second half, I always want to hang on to those timeouts unless you have a massive lead. That's the only situation where I say, it's okay to burn timeouts early in the second half. Because if you have Joe Burrow and you find yourself in a one-score game late, you always have a chance if you have timeouts. And I would say even more than a chance. You feel pretty good, right? If you're down 7 and there's a minute left and you have all 3 timeouts, you feel pretty good about Joe Burrow going down and finding a way to get in the end zone. Is it definitely going to happen? No. But if you have 1 minute, down 7, and no timeouts, that's a totally different story. You just can't exactly throw it over the middle, right? Then you're just kind of working the boundaries. Your defense is, playing that way. They understand that. But timeouts late in the game, it's something I always want to hold on to, especially if you have an elite quarterback that that he's going to be at his best at the end of the game, and he's going to put you in a spot where he can go out there and win the football game late. Want to hold on to those timeouts. They weren't able to do it against Cleveland. How that game played out, they had the lead for chunks of that game, obviously, and they weren't ready to call the play. So he said, you know what, we don't want to lose 5 yards. We got to do it. We got to call the timeout. I get that against that Cleveland front because 5 yards against those guys is a really, really significant thing. But if you're in a game with Jacksonville, for example, and it's tight, I don't want to see you burning those timeouts in the third quarter. I want to see you hanging on to them because that can be the difference in the game. That's just really something that's always been a pet peeve of me. I say it with an elite quarterback like Joe Burrow, but even like at the college level, right? I just don't understand. It's a little bit different in college because obviously the clock stops with the first down, but even if you don't have an elite quarterback, it's just such a safety blanket if you have those timeouts at the end of the game. Because, teams in the NFL, especially if they can run the football, they can really wind down that clock if they have a lead. And they can, pick up first downs and just chew the clock away, hold on the football, and win the game. And if you have those timeouts, that's a totally different story. I want to see him hold on to those timeouts. I get it against Cleveland, but I don't think Cincinnati should get into a habit of using them early in the third quarter. Hit some explosives. Key to victory number 5 here. The Bengals couldn't get anything going down the field. They only took a couple of shots. There's 2 off the top of my head. The one third down was like a 3rd and 2. They threw it up down the sideline to Jamar. Incredible coverage by Newsome. Joe Burrow basically said, yeah, we had one-on-one opportunities, but Cleveland feels comfortable in one-on-one spots with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. Obviously, as fans, we don't love to hear that, considering how much money those 2 guys are getting paid, and they were in one-on-one spots, and, Burrow wasn't able to get him the ball. They weren't able to catch the ball. But then they took one in the first half down the other sideline to Jamar. That kind of went out of bounds. That didn't really have a chance. Great coverage there by Denzel Ward. So if you hit a couple explosives in this game, you're going to win. It's just kind of how I feel. I think you're going to see Zach Taylor take some shots, particularly early in this football game. You can't force that kind of stuff. But at the same time, if you have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, big, fast, strong receivers, you got to give them opportunities and throw it up to them. I would be surprised if Jacksonville puts their corners on islands against those 2 guys. I don't think you're going to see that much at all throughout the rest of the year. Cleveland can get away with it because they have Newsome and Ward, but most of those corners in the NFL, they need safety help over the top, and that can sometimes limit the explosive plays. But if the Bengals can get a couple explosive plays, they're going to win this ball game. That's just, they have too much talent as it relates to that. And then key to victory number 6 here, final one. Cam Taylor-Britt, he's got to play better, right? Cam Taylor-Britt, he got benched at times last year, and then he always says the right things, right? And you hear about, him going up to the coaches saying, yeah, I need to be better, like I need to play better, I will play better. That's great, and I appreciate that mindset. I appreciate that accountability, but at the end of the day, you got to go out there and do it on the football field, and he really struggled that game against Cleveland, and he didn't really get exposed as much as maybe he should have because of the lack of weaponry that Cleveland has, and that's Joe Flacco playing quarterback. Like if he plays like that against a Baltimore or a Pittsburgh or a Buffalo or a Kansas City or one of the premier teams in the AFC, he is going to get exposed, and Cincinnati is probably going to lose the game because of that. Jacksonville has weapons. Brian Thomas Jr. is one of the next great LSU wide receivers. Only, I think, had 1 or 2 catches in the Week 1 game, but they're going to be looking to fix that. If you're Liam Coen, you're going to sit there and say, yeah, that should never happen throughout the rest of the year where you only get a couple of catches. Kind of similar to what happened to Jamar Chase, to be completely honest with you. But Brian Thomas Jr., they're going to look to get him involved. Travis Hunter, right? They're going to throw it to him as well. So they've got some quality receivers on this team for Jacksonville, and Cam Taylor-Britt has to be better. Is the Bengals bet on him, right? They're sitting there saying, we've seen flashes from you. We know you can hit really hard, but you can, which is incredible. We know he's got great ball skills, but sometimes he gets lost in coverage. Sometimes he doesn't, know the coverage they're supposed to be in and is in the wrong place at the wrong time. Those things can't happen, especially as you're becoming, a veteran here in the league. He's not a rookie anymore. He's not a second-year guy anymore. He needs to have some of those things cleaned up. And I don't think it's a speed issue. Cam Taylor-Britt can run, but oftentimes he is running and the receiver that he's guarding is not close to him, and that certainly is an issue. I feel really good, though, what you saw. Dax Hill's incredible. He was incredible in that game for the Cincinnati Bengals at that slot spot. If he can stay healthy, that is going to be huge for Cincinnati. And DJ Turner flashed in the game as well. The pick obviously sealed it, or just about sealed it. It was incredible. And you have a lot of upside as it relates to DJ Turner, but Cam Taylor-Britt has to be better in this football game for the Cincinnati Bengals. there you have it. 6 keys to victory for me this week. Stop the run, avoid negative plays, win the special teams battle, conserve those second half timeouts, hit some explosives, and CTB's got to play better. I think if you check off those boxes, I don't even probably need to check them all off, but if you check off 3 or 4 of those boxes, you're probably going to be victorious in this ball game. Again, I don't expect Cincinnati's offense to look the way it did in week 1. If you remember back to last season, looked like that against New England, and then you played Kansas City, and it was, okay, Joe Burrow and the boys, they're back. And I'm expecting we're going to see that at home on Sunday. All right. Got about 40 people in here hanging out with us in the comment section. Appreciate all of you guys. Hit that thumbs up icon. Got about 18 likes right now. Always going for that 50-50 like ratio as it relates to viewership and likes. So a couple more thumbs up certainly would be appreciated here on the show. And now we're going to transition our conversation into Thursday Night Football, which I think is a great game. You know, tonight, the Commanders and the Packers, it's an incredible football game, and I think people are really lucky as NFL fans that this is the game that we get, right? I talked about early in the show where, and a lot of times in the NFL, it kind of just felt like they just threw a random game out there on Thursday, right? And it would be like Titans, Jaguars, and you're just like, what are we doing? That's just not that fun. But it's the NFL, and we'll take it. It's Thursday night, right? Well, tonight you're getting a banger, and if you look at throughout the NFL Thursday night football schedule, there are lots of big games, and none really bigger than this one right here. Commanders and the Green Bay Packers, 2 of the premier teams in the NFC. Packers, of course, have Super Bowl aspirations after trading for Micah Parsons. The Commanders have a star rookie quarterback in Jaden Daniels. They just made the conference championship game last year, so I'm expecting this to be a really, really good game. A couple of storylines that I think people need to be monitoring going into this game are the Commander defense, right? They played really, really well against New York, which I get it. It's the Giants. It's Russell Wilson. Right, kind of feels like they just need to give the keys over to Jackson Dart, the rookie, and go from there. But they held them to 6 points. They were very, very impressive in that football game. And, you know, their interior, right, with Deron Payne, Marshawn Lattimore, right, who they traded for at the deadline last year from New Orleans. He didn't really do much for them last year, but this year in week 1, he looked really, really good against the Giants. They're hoping that he can, you know, be that lockdown corner guy for them as well. So the defense of the Commanders certainly is going to be something that the Packers are going to have a close eye on, right? I think the Packers got away with some stuff against Detroit, right? They really dominated that football game. There was a series where Jordan Love had one that should have been an interception. It was dropped, and then that same drive, he threw the interception, but there was a penalty that got called back. So Jordan Love is definitely a gunslinger. There is no two ways around that. But I really like Jordan Love. I think he's really going to take that next step and put Green Bay in a spot where they're competing for a world championship. The youngest team in the NFL is the Green Bay Packers. So, you know, this is their first real test, primetime game, standalone game, right? Matthew Golden, the guy can absolutely fly at that wide receiver position, first-round pick out of Texas. And really, the rest of the wide receiving core, I think you got to feel pretty good about as well. If you're the Green Bay Packers, I think Romeo Doubs flashed a little bit in that game. Jaden Reed, of course, who really has just been a solid guy for the Green Bay Packers, in my opinion. Right? I think, you know, he's kind of a return guy, right? A little bit gadgety, but he's just really sound as a football player, and he makes all the tough catches. He's a great football player. And then Dontavian Wicks, as well for Green Bay, also looked really solid in that game against the Detroit Lions. They've got some guys that are banged up. Zane Anderson, the safety, Aaron Banks, the guard, Brenton Cox, defensive end. Golden's on the injury list. Love with the left thumb. He's been practicing in full. He's going to be fine. Parsons, of course, has been limited dealing with the back stuff. Jaden Reed has a foot. He's been limited the past couple of days. Quay Walker, he's got a quad. He's been limited throughout the week, and Wicks also with a calf has been limited throughout the week. All those guys I just mentioned are going to play, but as I mentioned at the top of today's show, that to me is a little bit noteworthy that Green Bay is already in a spot where they're already this banged up. When you look at the flip side, as far as the Washington Commanders go, Jaden Daniels a little bit banged up as well with that right wrist injury. They looked really good against New York in that first game. They're going to have to be a lot better against this Green Bay Packers defense. You know, I think that Green Bay's defensive coordinator, Jeff Hafley, he is unbelievable. A lot of people kind of scratched their head a little bit when he left. He was the head coach at Boston College, and then he left to be the DC for the Green Bay Packers. That seems to be an incredible move for him. Seems to be an incredible hire for Matt LaFleur, their head coach, and now it kind of feels like it's only a matter of time before Hafley is, a head coach in the National Football League. So what they do defensively, really, really impressive. And Micah Parsons, obviously people are going to have a close eye on Micah Parsons. He had 3 pressures last week, one of which led to a Jared Goff interception. That certainly was significant. Had the sack at the very end of the game, borderline in garbage time. Micah Parsons had that sacks, but he has absolutely owned the Washington Commanders. 10.5 sacks in 8 career games versus Washington, almost twice as many against the Commanders as any other opponent in the National Football League. Also had 4.5 against Daniels last season. He plays absolutely unbelievable against the Washington Commanders, and Green Bay certainly hoping that he can play that way tonight for the Green Bay Packers. He played less than half of the defensive snaps last week. Lots of people actually saying that he played more snaps than Green Bay expected him to play in that game, but we'll see what his usage looks like today. He's been limited in practice throughout the week, but now he's in a spot where he still has that back, right? Still has that back injury, but he feels a little bit more comfortable in the system. He's been around a little bit more. I'm interested to see if that snap count increases for Micah Parsons in this football game. But, these are 2 teams that have Super Bowl aspirations, right? And they're playing in a massive game here on Thursday night. And 2 great quarterbacks that we get to see, Jaden Daniels and Jordan Love. And I'm really interested to see how this game shakes out, how this game transpires, because I think it could be a really, really good game. When you look at the previous primetime games that we've had here in the NFL, the last 2 have been sensational, right? The Bears and the Vikings, what a come from behind win that was for Minnesota on Monday night, and then Ravens-Bills, game of the year, obviously, to this point on Sunday night. That was pretty spectacular there as well. So looking forward to the game, obviously. We're going to be breaking it down tomorrow. I would lean the line right now, last I checked, was 3.5 in favor of Green Bay. I don't know if I'm laying the points, but I do think Green Bay is going to be successful and win this football game and really just kind of take off this year. If Jordan Love can limit those mistakes, I think they're going to be in a really good spot. Again, he's a bit of a gunslinger at times. He makes some throws that are a little bit scratched in your head, like, you probably should have just thrown that one away or, checked it down, whatever the case may be. But sometimes he gets a little ultra aggressive, and it can cost him. If he can cut back on those types of mistakes this year, I think Green Bay is going to be in a great spot. He's got all the tools. He's got mobility. He's got a huge arm, and he's got really good wide receivers, really fast wide receivers, and they can a great play caller as well in Matt LaFleur. So that's going to be an incredible football game against the Washington Commanders tonight, and we will be talking about that, of course, tomorrow on the show after the conclusion of that football game. I want to shift our conversation a little bit here to the Alabama Crimson Tide. Alabama, of course, has been at the top of college football for much of my life. Really, Saban got there in 07, 08. They won it in 09, and they really didn't look back, until he retired, right? Even his last year, the last couple of years, right, you saw some other schools kind of catching up to Alabama, right, when NIL really got going. But even those teams with Bryce Young, which weren't, Bryce Young was the best quarterback in college football while he was there, but those teams around him were not elite teams by any stretch of the imagination. They were able to win a lot of games, and that one year that got to the national championship before losing to Kirby Smart in Georgia, they were able to do that because of elite coaching and elite quarterback play. And even his last year, Nick Saban's last year with Jalen Milroe as the quarterback, not elite quarterback play by any stretch of the imagination, and found a way to get to the college football playoff and are a play away from beating Michigan, who of course won the national title that year. But then he retires. Was a surprise to me that he kind of went out the way he did. I thought he had a couple of more years left, but clearly frustrated with the landscape of college football, how, there was no kind of salary cap on the NIL. It was kind of just a free-for-all. He opts to retire and be done. And also, he was ready to have more of a quality of life and not be on that grind each and every day of being a head coach at a premier program. And he steps away. Kalen DeBoer gets the job. To be very clear, I thought that was the perfect guy as far as replacing Nick Saban. When I looked at the coaches that were available, I thought that was probably the guy that they should go after and they should target. Dan Lanning would be at the top of that list, and obviously Kirby Smart as well. But once those two guys were like, yeah, we're not leaving, then it became clear to me that if you can't get Dan Lanning and you can't get Kirby Smart, Caleb DeBoer should be the guy that you go after. But very quickly when Caleb DeBoer got to Alabama, things started to shift, right? It kind of became more of a free-for-all, right? You got players in the locker room making TikToks, dancing around, right? I mean, that kind of stuff never would have happened with Nick Saban as the head coach. And kind of an up-and-down year last year in his first year as the coach. He was in a spot where he was winning at the beginning of the year. Remember that win against Georgia in Tuscaloosa? That was a massive win. And then you stub your toe a few times. Tennessee game on the road, right? It happens. Rivalry game, fine. But then the loss to Vanderbilt, not good whatsoever. The Oklahoma game, worst game I've seen from an Alabama team before week 1 of this year. And then the bowl game against Michigan, a game in which Michigan did not play any of their guys that were going to the NFL. They all sat out, but all of your starters played for Alabama, and you clearly were trying to win the game, and you scored like 10 points, got punched in the mouth, and weren't able to win that game. So then the calendar flips over to 2025, and you have this Florida State game. Florida State, obviously a 2-10 team last year. Credit to Mike Norvell. You restructured his contract, and he's like, we got to make some changes here. Brings in new coordinators, Gus Malzahn, who's had some success against Alabama, is brought in to be the offensive coordinator. And that first game, Florida State-Alabama, was not competitive whatsoever. Florida State absolutely dominated that game. They punched Alabama in the mouth, mind you, after they'd been talking crap the entirety of the offseason and the week leading up to the game. And Bama got punched in the mouth, and they did not respond. It was time to hit the panic button in Tuscaloosa after that game, because not only that they lost, and they lost by as many points as they did, but the way in which they lost, the effort just was not there from Alabama at all. And that's something you never saw with Nick Saban as the head coach. Effort was never an issue, and just the lack of physicality as well. Your offensive line was supposed to be one of the best offensive lines in the country, and you got pushed around by a team that went 2-10 last year. Again, Florida State went to the portal. They made a lot of adjustments. Credit to them for doing that. But, Caden Proctor, your left tackle for Alabama, was viewed as being a lock top 10 pick. He got shoved around in that game. Will Conform, your right tackle. He's just flat out not very good. Cam Dewberry, one of your interior guards from the transfer portal from Texas A&M. Didn't play that well. Parker Brailsford, supposed to be one of the best centers in the country, transferred from Washington a couple of years ago. He got shoved around. So you got absolutely bullied in that game if you're Alabama. And that, I think, is what has people pressing the panic button for the Alabama Crimson Tide. And also Ryan Williams. He was lined up 90% of the snaps in that game against Florida State. He was lined up in the slot. Ryan Williams isn't a slot receiver. He's a guy that should be on the outside, running down the field as a vertical threat, making plays. He doesn't have the quickness or the strength or I hate to say he's not tough, or the toughness to be a slot guy. All of his success last year was not in the slot. This is a guy that's like a Chris Olave. Line him up on the outside and let that boy run. That's not what they did. So that was really head-scratching for me as far as what the plan was there for Ryan Williams. He got drilled all game long, and then late in the game he gets drilled really bad, and he's concussed. And he misses the game against La Monroe, which we'll talk about in a second. And we'll see if he plays this week against Wisconsin or not for the Crimson Tide. But, it was time to hit the panic button in Tuscaloosa after that Week 1 game. And, they really needed to respond. If you remember, there was a clip that kind of went viral on social media with, the Powerball was like $2 billion or like 1.8 or something outrageous. And, some local news person asked somebody what they would do with the money. And she was like, I tell you what I do with the first $70 million. I get Kalen DeBoer the heck out of Alabama. And, look, it was just everybody is, coming at his throat. That's just what happens when you're at Alabama and you're not winning and you're looking as uncompetitive as Alabama did. Now, the following week, they played UL Monroe. And, I'm not going to say the Sisters of the Poor, but it's right there, right? And Alabama won that game 73-0. Now, is there much to take from that game? I think in most situations you would say no, right? Alabama has to prove it this week against Wisconsin. The line's like 21. That seems like a lot of points to me, despite the fact that it is in Tuscaloosa. But back to UL Monroe, I think the only reason why you can take a little bit of something from it if you're Alabama is considering what the rest of the top teams in the country did against lesser opponents, right? LSU, they were messing around with Louisiana Tech. They was like, 21-6? Clemson against Troy, they were down 16-0 in that game before coming back and winning. Penn State against FIU, preseason number 1 team in the country, they were up 10-0 at half against FIU. That's a problem. Georgia, right? Looked at, as kind of the king of the SEC here at this point. They were messing around with Austin Peay, right? So a lot of those premier teams did not play well against lesser opponents, but Alabama was able to go out there and win 73-0. And one thing that I think needs to be said as far as Alabama having a chance was Ty Simpson perfect or great or good in the Florida State game? No, not at all. But Ty Simpson can clearly play. If you watch him play in that Florida State game, he can clearly play. He was running for his life throughout the entirety of that game. He's tough. He can run. He's got an arm. He's accurate, right? Now, he made some questionable decisions. There was one play in the Florida State game where he could have taken off for a first down, clearly had green grass ahead of him. He decides to throw it at the last minute and skips it to Ryan Williams on fourth down. Massive play in the game, and it kind of was that moment. They probably weren't going to come back and win anyway, but that was kind of the last straw, so to speak, for Alabama. But against UL Monroe, he was a perfect 17 of 17 in the game. Now, I get it. Stone, it's UL Monroe. What are you talking about? But to be perfect in the game, he was perfect. He did not throw an incompletion in the game, had a bunch of touchdowns, was throwing the ball downfield, using his legs. To be perfect in the game, and there's some credit that he should get for that, right? If you're in, running routes on air, right, with no defense, and you go perfect, that's kind of like, okay, that's pretty solid, right? No drops, right? To do it against an actual defense, pretty impressive, despite the fact that it was obviously UL Monroe and the caliber of players they have, totally different. But, if Alabama would have came out and won that game 21-7 or something against UL Monroe, or even 28-7, it really would have gotten really loud in Tuscaloosa. And let me be very clear, it's very loud right now. But after you're able to put up that kind of a performance against a lesser opponent, kind of remind people, yeah, we're still Alabama, and we'll see how things go from here. Now, problem for Alabama is there really isn't much room for error as they progress throughout the rest of their schedule. Their schedule is a gauntlet. All right, they got Wisconsin this week, and then you've got ranked opponents all over the place throughout the rest of your SEC schedule. Good news is you have Tennessee and LSU at home. That's significant, right? Two of your top rivals, obviously. The Auburn game is on the road. I don't care what the records of the two teams are going into that game. That's going to be a war, right, in a couple of weeks. So you got Wisconsin this week, then you have the bye, and then you go to Athens between the hedges to play Georgia. Well, Georgia has won 33 consecutive games at home. Alabama's had Georgia's number, but going to Georgia, that's a different animal. So if you slip up and you lose that game, you got to run the table to make the college football playoff. Is that something you can do? Based on what we've seen from this team this year, no, it's not. But if you can win that Georgia game, get some confidence about you, maybe get some support behind Kalen DeBoer a little bit as far as it relates to the Alabama fan base, maybe you can turn things around. But you have a gauntlet of a schedule ahead of you. And I'm really interested to see how they play in that Georgia game. You don't want to look past Wisconsin, right? Wisconsin, Luke Fickell, solid defense. Billy Edwards, by the way, their starting quarterback, Maryland transfer. He's not going to play in the game. So that's a break for Alabama there, obviously. But the schedule's tough. And, look, Kalen DeBoer, I'm not going to say he's on the hot seat because the buyout's $70 million, as I alluded to earlier. And there's just no way that that's going to be paid by Alabama. I don't think that is going to happen. But he's got to improve, and he's got to have his team playing a little bit faster, a little bit tougher, a little bit more physical, a little bit more disciplined as well. Because when you see Alabama play, were they ever going to look like Nick Saban, Alabama, no matter who the coach was? No, they weren't. It wasn't going to, the dynasty ended when he retired. Will they still win national championships? Maybe, right? They're still going to have good recruits as time goes on. But for the most part, there's no way that they were going to, be able to live up to that same standard. But the standard has fallen off a cliff. It's not even close, what you saw. Kalen DeBoer, he's a West Coast guy. He's a nice guy, right? But, the nice guys win in the SEC. I don't know. Brandon Walker said he had to be a borderline criminal to win in the SEC, and he might be onto something there. So we'll see. We'll spend some time talking about Alabama. I think they're a fascinating team to discuss, and they've got their work cut out for them as it relates to the rest of their schedule. And they got Wisconsin at noon on Saturday at home in Tuscaloosa. All right, got about 10 minutes here left in the show. Promise some Cincinnati Reds conversation. And we're going to be talking about the Cincinnati Reds here to close out today's show. Reds are off tonight. And then they have the Athletics for 3 games on the road. Let me just pull up this schedule here on the fly so I can confirm exactly what the remaining slate looks like for the Cincinnati Reds. But the game last night, really impressive that you're able to win that game, right? Pivetta was going. You knew it was going to be a pitcher's duel. You were just hoping Andrew Abbott could keep you in the game, and that's exactly what he did. Andrew Abbott is my favorite player on this team. He is unbelievable. He is a dog, and he just goes out there and competes every single time he takes the hill, and he's an innings eater as well, as he got you 8 innings of work last night in the game. And he doesn't throw the hardest, obviously, but he knows how to pitch, and he knows how to compete, and he knows how to win, even when he doesn't have his best stuff. Now, his stuff was pretty good last night, but there's been so many times throughout his career and throughout this season where he hasn't had his best stuff, and he still puts Cincinnati in a position to win the game. But for the much of the game, it was 1-0. Kind of felt like it was going to be a 1-0 game. You were going to lose. And you go into the off day, and but we're not talking about the Cincinnati Reds right now if you lose the game last night. It's just kind of the reality, because it kind of feels like a season killer if you lose the game last night. But as Cowboy alluded to on the broadcast, they're like a bunch of cockroaches. No matter what you do to this team, they just keep coming back, and they will not die. And that's what you've seen throughout the course of the past couple of months. Despite the fact we've seen lots of frustrating baseball be played after the All-Star break, the Reds are just hanging around. Now, the Mets, of course, there's two sides to that coin. The Mets are letting the Reds hang around. All right, the Reds are 2 games over 500, and the Mets are just kind of in a plummet. Mets, by the way, national TV game tonight against the Philadelphia Phillies on Fox. So if you're not watching football, definitely keep an eye on that. That's certainly a significant game. Giants are off tonight as well. You're tied with the Giants right now, 2 games behind the Mets. But, if you win this series against the A's, then it's just divisional opponents the rest of the way. And the Reds, of course, have struggled within the division for quite some time, not just, this year, but several years. And, that's fitting that you just have the division to finish out the season, and you'll see what you can do. 3 more games. So the road trip, of course, started with the Padres series. You got 3 more on the West Coast with the A's. Have to win that series, non-negotiable. Can't win 1. 2 at minimum. You would like a sweep, but 2 at minimum has to be done. 3 against St. Louis. You probably got to win 2 of those 3, right? So then you have 3 against St. Louis, 4 at home against the Cubs, 3 against the Pirates, and then 3 against the Brewers. Do you have to win every single series? I don't think so. I don't think you need to win every single one. You obviously can't get swept, but I think if you're in a spot where you're, what is this on the 5? 3, 6, 9, 10, 13, 16 games left. I think if you win 10 of them, you're probably in, to be honest with you. If you go 10-6 over these next 16 games, you are probably in, and that certainly is very exciting. And one thing I do want to mention here is Tito Francona, right? This is why you got him, right? This is, you can say what you want about Tito. Oh, it's old school baseball. He's bunting too much. He doesn't care at all about analytics. You can say all those things. That's fine. And for the record, I would like my manager to lean towards using his eyeballs and using his brain when making decisions, right? Now, Tito sometimes just doesn't even know what an analytic is, which probably this day and age of baseball isn't the best thing, but I would err on the side of old school. Now, bunting, there's been some situations throughout the season where he's bunting in some weird spots, and it's got me shaking my head a little bit. But you brought Tito Francona in for these moments, right? I always have said, if the Reds can get into the postseason, then you're really going to see the magic of Terry Francona. Well, you're in the postseason right now. That's basically what it is. You got 16 games left, and you're 2 games back of the playoffs. These next 16 games is basically postseason baseball, and you got about half on the road, and you got about half at home, and you got a whole lot of divisional opponents ahead of you. I think you're going to see Tito Francona really show what he can do and win you a couple of these games. I said 10-6 gets you in. That's what my gut says at this point, just kind of on the fly. I think 10-6 over these next 16 gets you in. I think Tito's going to win you 1 or 2 of these games, just with a decision that he makes, a call that he makes, a bold decision that he makes, whether it be pulling a guy and putting somebody else in or letting a guy stay and letting him ride, a pinch hitter that he puts in, Andujar, right? Of course, yesterday comes in off the bench. I absolutely love watching that guy play. He comes in as a blue pit, but it's a clutch hit, brings home the winning run in that game. I think Terry Francona is really going to show some of that magic that he has over the course of the next couple of weeks, and we'll see. We'll see, because it's certainly very, very exciting for the Cincinnati Reds right now. And then you kind of look ahead a little bit, right? If the Reds make the playoffs, they're obviously going to be the 6th seed in the National League, the last seed, and that means they play the 3 seed in a 3-game series in the wild card round. And it's not locked in yet. It's not set in stone, but as you kind of look at the schedules, you look at the standings, you look where everybody's at, feels like that 3 seed is going to be the Los Angeles Dodgers. So if you get in, right, obviously we're ecstatic. If the Reds get in, it's awesome. We're in, September, October baseball here in Cincinnati. While the Bengals are playing, that would be awesome. But obviously it could be short-lived with a 3-game series against the Los Angeles Dodgers. We all saw what transpired late August when you went out there to L.A. All the games, by the way, would be on the road. When you went out to L.A. and you just got whipped for 3 straight games, not competitive whatsoever. So if you get there, there's a little bit of concern. I think the Reds much rather would play Philadelphia. Looks like they're probably going to get the 2. We'll see. But you'd play Philadelphia in the divisional round if you were able to get past the Los Angeles Dodgers. But that's obviously looking ahead. You're just trying to get into the postseason here at this point. But as I said yesterday on the show, my expectation coming into the year, it was very cut and dry. It's a success if you make the playoffs, and it is a failure if you don't. I don't care how you do it. I don't care how many games you win. I don't care if you're 500 and it gets you in, right? I don't care about any of that. It was just get in. And if you get in, it's successful. And if you don't, it's a failure. It's very, obviously that's dramatic, but I think that's really just the reality of the situation for the Cincinnati Reds. And they have put themselves in a spot to continue to get our hopes up and play decent enough baseball. The pitching's there, right? The pitching is good enough to get you to the postseason. That's not the issue whatsoever. It's the bats. It's the offense. Again, even like throughout this Padres series, we're all over the moon about it. I mean, 2 runs yesterday, right? You won the second game of the series 4 runs. You lost the first game of the series 3 runs. You beat the Mets 3 runs, right? You beat the Mets 6 runs. You lose the Mets 4 runs. So it's like the offense, obviously the offense showed up in a big way, those 2 losses against the Blue Jays, but they were just kind of hanging around that 3-4 runs a game, which certainly if you do that in the playoffs against the Dodgers, that's not going to be enough. But even as you look at the rest of their schedule, maybe that can get you by against the Athletics. But when you're playing the Cubbies and you're playing the Brewers and the Cardinals and Pirates have just had success against you this year, that's just the reality of the situation. The offense is going to have to be a lot better for the Cincinnati Reds, and we'll see if they can do it. But the fact we're sitting here talking about baseball on September 11th and the Reds have a real shot, that certainly is very, very intriguing. Obviously, there will be a ton of Reds coverage here at the channel. That's really what Chatterbox Sports was built off of. Nick Kirby's got you covered. Trace Fowler's got you covered. The boys got you covered with the pregame show. Just all types of Reds coverage here at the channel. And obviously, if the Reds are in a spot where they're competing, we're going to be talking about them here on the show as well. All right, so we are just about out of time here on today's edition of the Stone Shield Show. Was going to talk a little bit about the Big 12, but are going to save that conversation for another day. Again, it's not UC related. UC plays nobody this week. It's like Northwestern State or somebody like that. But as far as their conference schedule goes, it could be a lot worse for UC. It's kind of weak as it relates to the Big 12. And, maybe that can open the door for them to win a couple of more games than some people expected. But I was really just going to talk about the Big 12 as a conference. Basically, they were in a spot going into Saturday where they had lots of opportunities to make some things happen, have some big wins, and they start out the day really strong. That Iowa State game, Iowa State's a tough team. Rocco Beck, their quarterback, seasoned veteran Matt Campbell, really like where he has his team at right now. But then like Kansas, they were ahead early against Missouri, right? Jalen Daniels, certainly a great quarterback, and then they blow that lead, and then they end up not even covering the spread, by the way, in that game as well. But Utah and Texas Tech, not this week, but that's the big noon game next week. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about that on the show. Utah is my sleeper team this year. I think Utah is really, really good. Kyle Whittingham is one of the most underrated coaches in the country, and that's going to be a banger in 2 weeks. So really excited about that. Utah not on the schedule for Cincinnati, by the way. That certainly is a break, so we'll discuss that at length next week. Plenty of more football, college football conversation here at the show tomorrow. So we're going to recap the Thursday night game. We're going to talk Cincinnati Bengals, of course, as we do every day here on the show. We're going to do that tomorrow. Probably not much Reds talk with the night off tonight, but we will have a segment. We're going to be doing our best bets of the weekend. Mo Egger, his radio show, used to have the locks of the weekend. We're going to do something similar like that. We'll come up with a new name, of course. No graphics at this point for that. But, I don't know exactly how many games I'm going to do. I don't know exactly how many college, how many pros, but it's going to be football bets, possibly over-unders, but really just against the spread. And we'll have our best bets. We'll track them. If you guys want to ride, obviously, that you're welcome to ride. Obviously, obviously don't feel obligated to do so. But then, we'll recap them. We'll track them throughout the year as well. So I think that'll be a fun thing to do on Fridays, and looking forward to starting that on tomorrow's show. But we are out of time here at this point. And appreciate everybody that locked in with us. Had about 40-ish, 50 people in here watching throughout the entirety of the show. Certainly appreciate that, even without Off the Bench starting at 10 o'clock today. But no Off the Bench again tomorrow. Trace Fowler, Reed Mouse, they will be back on Monday. But be on the lookout for Reed's Power Rankings. We'll release that video on YouTube later this afternoon, and also plenty of clips from my show as well. We're also, with my show, going to be starting a Twitter page. We actually already have it right now, but we'll see a lot more clips up there as well. And then plenty of clips from this show will be on the Chatterbox Sports Twitter page as well. Nick Kirby, all the social guys do a tremendous job running that page, and you'll see stuff from our show up there as well. But that'll do it for today's edition of the Stone Shield Show. Enjoy the football tomorrow, and looking forward to talking to you guys tomorrow morning. Until then, take care, everybody.